Okay. All right. So yesterday we talked a little bit about growth mindset and about grit and metacognition and universal design for learning. We're going to talk more about those today as well. We talked about Bloom's taxonomy. We talked about that learning math is more than mimicking or a process. Talked about, promoting those learner goals as far as that's so much more like learning goals are far superior than just performance goals. So talking to students about where they are functioning on Bloom's taxonomy. We did the Goldilocks and the Three Bears. We talked about them yesterday. Talked about supporting our students and understanding that learning is sometimes a longer process than what they had intended, more so than memorization. Sometimes we can remember something short term, and then I put this inquire about something they do well, and meaning that if a student tells you that they're terrible at math or whatever, try to root it in something that they do well and asking those questions. Well, how did you become so good at whatever it is? A lot of our students can play instruments or even playing video games. Or I was thinking my conversation I had with a student yesterday about really good at video games. And I'm like, well, how'd you get so good? And well, I play them all the time. I'm like, well, just imagine if you would invest that time into learning math, how much better you would be at doing math. And so then, just kind of putting a frame of reference to that, inquiring on what they do well, how they get good at it, what's their mindset about achieving success with that task. Finding those short successes. Students like to see achievement along the way. And then explaining about the learning process, explaining everything there is about the learning process and about how it isn't something that's quick, and about that it's important to have a positive mindset on your ability and neuroplasticity, about the brain and how we know so much more about how the brain learns. Oh, before we jump right in there. So does anybody have any feedback about yesterday? Anything they resonated with them, or anything they want to share?
Well, there was something that actually I was thinking about after our session yesterday regarding Bloom's taxonomy, that I have used it when I'm designing lessons and gathering materials, but I've never talked directly to my students about it, and I think that's just a really good approach.
Yeah, I used to not do that either, Jeremy. So appreciate that feedback. I just recently have started to do this since we are teaching adults. It to me, it kind of anchors that learning where they are. And so a lot of times when students are trying to memorize something, I'll pull it out and say, where are you functioning at in Bloom's right now, to get them to kind of see that, especially if the task asks them, which today I'm going to ask you guys to do things that are like, I know you know how to get to the answer, so I'm going to ask you to do something different. And so it's that whole going beyond the algorithm type of a thing. And so helping your students kind of situate themselves that way as well. Anyone else? And I apologize, John. I saw that you posted a link yesterday, but I didn't get a chance to look at it. So I might have to have you email it to me about I know it was on grit, and but I didn't know what did anybody read it? Did anyone get a chance? I'd like to know what it was.
Yes, I read it.
Could you tell
Um,
me a little bit about it, Jeremy?
yeah, so it talks about how there's also a downside to grit, and it can cause us basically to focus on um, encouraging our students to participate in learning as if it's a chore and an unpleasant task
Mhm.
without regard for maybe their unique motivators and their unique needs, and how that relates to really our sense of our needs as adults. And I actually, this wasn't necessarily in the article, but I thought specifically about, say, like our neurodivergent students
Mhm.
who are maybe motivated in completely different ways than we are, and it might be different to us. And I think there's some truth to that. And I think that's one of I after reading the article, I mean, so my initial reaction is I don't necessarily see grit and persistence as being just inherently bad.
Mhm.
Um, but I think sometimes as educators, we take these ideas and maybe don't apply them judiciously, if
Mhm.
that makes sense.
Mhm. No, it does.
And I'm
I,
kind of speaking beyond the article now at this point, but I would encourage you to read it. I think it was a really fascinating article.
Mhm.
Jeremy, what you said, I reminds me of what I thought about when I've read the stuff about grit, where I like with our neurodivergent students, because a lot of students who are neurodivergent struggle with executive function. And
Mhm.
when you read the definition of executive function and you read the definition of grit, they're very, very similar. And I've been trying to find information about like, are those
Mhm.
talking about, are those two different ways about talking about the same thing? Where is the overlap and where is not the overlap? And, are we putting certain students at a disadvantage when we approach things a certain way because that's just not something that's a strength for them or not how their brain works?
Mhm.
I would agree with that. And I would add one thing to, the article is, of course, mostly geared towards maybe K-12 education, but I think it also applies to adults. But in what we do, helping our students prepare for the GED exam, there is, I think, a place for a certain amount of grit, because there's no doubt we're trying to um, get them to work on skills that might sometimes seem unpleasant, but you ultimately need them,
Mhm.
um, I hate to say it, but in order to pass the exam. Uh, and so I'm thinking about, all right, so how do we kind of balance that then? And like what Nikita said, make it so that it is not just a chore for our students. Because if we were just um, presenting them with a chore, we would just give them the Kaplan book and say, hey, here, have at it, but that doesn't really work very well. So it's got me thinking, I still feel like I have a lot to think about after reading the article.
Mhm. Yeah. And I see, John, you wanted to add, and then I'll put some thoughts to it too. Go ahead, John.
Sure. And, you know, I appreciate looking at these approaches critically. And I just thought it was serendipitous, Brooke, that within that article, Alfie Kohn mentions that if at first you don't succeed, try again in sort of a cheeky, snarky little fashion. And
Mhm.
so just to be, what's the word? Not anathema, or, you know, to be contrary, I suppose, and to be a provocateur.
No, it's okay. So one thing that is interesting about all these learning theories is that they really are through the lens of the researcher, a lot of them. One of the things that Bowler has said is that, and as well as Dweck, is talking about that learning is cyclic, and that remembering that we all go through those phases. And so with the when I was looking at the grit research, for me, I see it through the lens of how it's very similar to growth mindset, but I also, after you guys have mentioned these things, I can also see it from that perspective. I think that there's ways to support learners. I think that for me, it's more about having students believe in themselves and that self-belief. Um, I know that there are also, um, some articles that speak about growth mindset and about how it's not in a positive light as well. So I think it's good to read both and then kind of process them, let it swoosh around, you know, and then look at because learners are, I mean, we're not making widgets here as much as the education system would like us to believe that we're widget makers, we're not, and everybody is unique, and I think that we do that well here in adult ed, is looking at those unique things. Go ahead, John.
Well, sorry to interrupt, but
No.
you got me excited there because it really is that sort of art and science of teaching where we're trying to instill lifelong learning practices and help students develop, you know, graphic organizers and confidence and foundational skills and scaffolding, advocacy, self-advocacy, so many different
Yes.
facets. And to me, it's the parallel I was making related to some of that content is the nuances of persistence and grit, you know, maybe as they relate or analogous to the way we reinforce that conversation about, do we reward intelligence or do we reward effort? And then it goes right back to your notion of growth mindset then, right? And it did resonate with me. I, as a teenager and as a young adult, in high school and in undergrad, there were admittedly occasions where I chose classes because I was more concerned about keeping a certain GPA than I was. And it was comfort. We were talking about those gendered nuances and how we raise kids. And as a father to daughters, specifically or otherwise, as a parent, I too am trying to be more careful about what I reinforce. And to me, I just want my kids to be curious and be curious and not be worried about grades or that fear of reinforcing some sort of societal expectation. Thank you.
Yeah, no, that's great because that really falls in what we're really going to be talking about today is the whole idea of what does learning truly mean? I mean, we've kind of distorted that its meaning over the years, and we see it when our students come in. So, and some of the things that you were talking about, John, to me, that talks about educational maturity, like, because as you grow older, you value the learning aspect so much more than, like, I also took classes that I knew would be easy as well. So, but as you grow older, you accept those challenges. And I think for our students, they have in the past been very much conditioned in math, especially, just do as I do, you'll get the problem, it'll be fine, instead of like, let's take time. And I think adult ed is the most beautiful stage to do this with our learners, is to help them to see that, you know, those difficult skills, maybe we need to kind of think about and process them in a different way than just mimicking. And so we're going to do some of that today. Okay. All right. Well, let's talk more about metacognition. I'm going to kind of go through each of these 10 different little metacognition type of strategies that are out there in the ecosphere in the research. One is called previewing. And so I always ask my students this question: have you ever been reading something and your mind wanders off and you continue to read and then you look down at the page and you're like, what did I just read? Does anybody ever do that? Yeah, I do it a lot too. And I'm like, wait a second. So what do we do? We naturally go back to wherever we first started wandering off and we read it again and our brain wanders off again. And so then what ends up happening is we're not actively engaged in that. So a strategy is that your brain does better when we have an outline. So just knowing what that would look like in adult ed is I put like whatever it would be, the objective of the day, the topic of the day, definitions, anything that kind of anchors what you're going to be talking about, or maybe there are words that aren't familiar to the student. That's just a good way to kind of, so that way when you say that word, or when you start talking about whatever whatever the subject or the topic is that you're talking about, the brain will like re-engage and say, oh, that's one of those things that was on the board that we should be talking about. And so it's just a way for them to have some kind of an anchor or an outline. I used to not be a very good at writing down what we were going to be doing for the day. I would just be like, oh, we're just going to show up and do some stuff. But I've since started to do that because of the fact of the mind wandering and the attention span of most adults. And so this does allow the brain to recognize and process more information. That's what research is showing. Another strategy is preparing. So you prepare your students for active learning. So once the students says that they know what they will be doing, they need to know the reason. And because I told you so, or because it's on the test, is not a very good reason. So our brains don't like to be told they have to do anything. So providing questions about a topic. So I gave an example here, like what's the difference between a positive and negative slope? And how can you tell both with a picture and with an equation? Just having that up on the board as a preview for preparing for what you're going to be talking about. So we're going to be talking about slope today. And so one of the questions that I have is maybe this. So just coming up with a few questions to help kind of engage that. Okay, so this is the question she's going to ask me. So I'm going to engage in this so that way I can obtain an answer. So this is from some research by doing this preview, students become primed for pattern recognition. And so they experience more frequent spikes in interest in the material being taught, and even have more courage to ask questions in class because they're more comfortable with this type of discourse. So this could even be like, if you're, because algebra seems to be a big one where students are like, where am I ever going to see this in the world? So maybe the question would be, where would you see this type of problem in the world, and maybe this is an activity where we would have to write stories about a particular problem. So that way they're more engaged. It's not just, I told you that you're going to have to learn to solve for X. And so this is what we're going to do. This kind of just active learning prepares them that this is what we're going to be doing. Oops, I went too fast. Paraphrasing. So this is another good strategy. Allowing students to put whatever it is, words, process, procedures, make it theirs. That reflection time. We've talked about this in several other institutes, giving time to reflect and write out the process as though they were going to explain it to whoever, friend, family member, dog, cat, fish, whatever. Just have them reflect on the process. So that way it becomes more of them and less of because this is what the teacher told me to do, because it makes sense to do whatever it is. So then we start talking about learning actively. So this may look different for each learner. It's about helping them to identify how they enjoy the engagement. Remember that they became proficient at whatever it was. How did they become engaged in that? So there are so many, like for our students that like gaming, there are so many websites out there for gaming and for play and things like that, that I would give as many websites as I could to a student and allow them the opportunity to engage in some of those. If they enjoy reading through and just looking through examples, I would try to find as many things or books that I could give them so they could enjoy that process. Believe it or not, there are podcasts about math. I mean, for students that enjoy listening to math stories, See, for me, I think to myself, ugh, that would just sound terrible, but somebody may like that. So it's about just being open to what the student wants and helping them to select what makes sense for their learning. Maybe they like the hands-on, maybe they need more things to do. And so, as a teacher, that falls on us to put in that extra work. So we kind of have to learn to like everything, or at least have a card catalog. There's an old reference for you of facts that you can just pull from to help your students learn. Flashcards, mind maps, outlines. Some students like to draw, so mind maps are really good for those types of students, artistic. Using other resources, even if it's not required. So I like to talk to my students a lot about, engagement outside of class, being able to access learning materials, worksheets, websites, whatever it is, where they can go and ask and get and have that. For example, do you see this it's like a little flashcard I just put up there. So what do you think that word is? C blank T.
Chart.
What'd you say? Cart? I didn't hear what you.
Chart.
Cart could, okay. Could
Or
be
chart.
chart.
Like
Could be
charts and
chart.
graph. Yeah.
Yep.
Count,
Cat, could be cat.
cot,
Cot.
count.
Yep. So there's a lot of words that this one little thing could be. And if you are a master, or if you understand content well enough, you don't need to have all the information in the middle. You are able to come up with words that begin with C and end with T. And we could continue this list for a long time. But if you're not familiar, let's say you're a non-native speaker and I don't know enough about foreign language myself to say, I don't know if there is in some languages words that begin with C and end with T. I'm sure there's languages that don't begin with C and don't end in T. And so this is to kind of show you that we need additional resources to help kind of cement understanding. So there's a lot of research on handwritten notes, because I don't know about you, but my students have started to come to class and take pictures of the screens and stuff. Yeah. Well, I try to tell them that we know recent studies show that taking notes by hand results in more learning than does taking notes with technology. That students are forced to put their ideas in their own words when they write, because they have to learn to paraphrase, because there's no possible way that a student can capture everything that you say. And plus, they want to make sure that their notes are solid. And so being able to put extra explanations in there, I tell my students that this is a way for them to reflect. So I always kind of give space for that after we work through some examples, so that way they can make sure that they're clear on their understanding, that it forces them. This is new for a lot of our students, because in the K-12, especially the younger students in the K-12 setting, they use a lot of technology, and note writing is not always the most preferred method. So, but I tell them that as adults, I write, people write notes all the time, but it's a good way to just reinforce those ideas. Another good thing about them taking notes is that if a students miss a class, I always encourage them to go ask another student for their notes, because those notes are going to be so much better than just my slides, because my slides are just going to show the problems or whatever, they're not going to be as detailed. There won't be those explanations. And so I try to tell my students that it's so important if they are able to share notes with each other as well. Doing practice work without using solved examples as a guide. Now, this one's a hard one, because a lot of my students like to flip back to an example. I tell them to try to do the work without an example. Now, And then they can check their answer and then work to see if the process was different. So I show them my way and they compare it to their way. And then if the approaches are different, I ask them to explain why, because this is a great opportunity for them to create deeper meaning, deeper learning. Now, some students just sit there and they say they don't know where to start. So they kind of sit there for a while. So this is what I tell them. If they can't get started, to set a timer for 5 minutes. I allow them to go back through notes, books, whatever, so they can find, just don't look at the whole problem, just how did the problem start? How did the problem get started? How did we talk about the problem get started? And then when the timer goes off, they try to go back and do the problem again. If they get stuck, we just repeat that process. They can't move on, set another timer, look for that next process until they can solve that task independently. And that's because of the fact that it's so easy to go to the example and try to memorize steps, because I try to tell them that memorization of those steps is not gonna stick with them, that they need to create their own, like, did that make sense? Does that make sense? Anybody have students that do that? Just look at the example. Yeah. That's a big one for me. I'm working on this one right now. And I try to remind them that mistakes are okay. We have got to get past the fear that they're going to make a mistake. Because I make mistakes, they're going to make mistakes. All professionals make mistakes. All geniuses make mistakes. It's okay. So just trying to get them to be okay with those mistakes. Students as teachers. Having students teach what they learn to a friend, a pet, a child, an imaginary person, I don't care. I tell my students this, that try to teach a concept that's not fully developed in their mind to someone else. I tell them to do it normally within a 24-hour period. And then, like I tell them, then that will identify those areas of confusion. Where do they have gaps in understanding? Or where were details they're not clear about? Because especially if it's another live person and they ask questions, then that student may not know that answer and they'll bring it back to me. A lot of times it's parents to children, which is great, because then the children are getting kind of of course, I hear from my adult learners a lot, well, my child said that's not how they do the problem. I try to remind them that K-12 education is sometimes rooted in still memorization and following that. Group work. Well, you guys know that I love group work. So group work gives those students opportunities to teach. It helps to evaluate each other's thinking, trying to understand from another person's perspective. It's the discussion can be more in depth because there are going to be questions that I would never think to ask. Vygotsky and Bruner both stated that students need to engage in both discussion and problem solving. So you can't just put students in groups and then, like, all of a sudden they're not talking about the task at hand. So just, you need to make sure that you tell the students, like, it's okay to talk about some social aspects, but we are here to do a task. And so encourage both discussion and of that task. Mock exams. Now, this can be a fun one. Practice tests, they help deepen our understanding. So I normally have students create their own assessments. And then I give them out over a series of days or weeks. So normally I'll have a student, like, I'll have each student create like 2 or 3 problems that they would like for us to solve. And then every week or 2, I will pull one out and we'll take these little mock exams together. And so they like it because I at first didn't tell them that we'd be taking them, together. And so first they made them really hard. And so, they were really challenging at first. And so we had to work some of those together. But then over time I was like, okay, now that you guys have gotten that out of your system, let's be realistic about what the types of problems that you want to see. It's no different than doing number of the day. because number of the day, my class knows that subtraction is, I can do it. It's just a difficult process for me. And so a lot of my students like to do a repetitive subtraction problem. They're ornery that way. It's fine. Okay, so I am going to jump us into our first activity. So I'm going to try to put you in groups of 2. So I hope the people that have their cameras off will be available to participate. And I want to kind of go over something real like the directions together instead of just kind of just throwing you in there. So let me pull one of these up. And wait for it to pop up here. Okay, so this requires you to have a dice. So I put this link in here to a virtual dice. So when you click on it, it should redirect you to a roll the dice thing, mnemonic generators for those of us that don't. And so you're going to need 4 of them. So 4 6-sided dice. So you're just going to click on the 6-sided dice. So you have 4 of them up there. And then you're going to roll the dice like that. And so those are wow, that's pretty good roll. And so this idea of cover the field is that each player takes a turn to roll the 4 dice. Those values that are shown, you come up with a length and width of a rectangle, and you can choose how to group things together. For example, if you had a 6, 4, 3, 1, you might choose to do 4 plus 3, so that way you get 7, and then a 6 plus 1, so that's a 7 by 7, and then that would be your rectangle. Or you could do like a 6 plus 3, which gives you 9, and a 4 plus 1 to give you 5, so that would be a 9 by 5. So you need to think about rectangles that you can make, which will give you the most useful and what we call covering the field. So down here, there's a chart about highlighting. You're gonna highlight your field, your space, and if you need to, you can record what you did. I only put 2 lines there because sometimes writing, but you could just 4 plus 3, you could write your own down there, so you can keep track of what you did. And I put 3 different game boards on there because sometimes you get through it. It's like tic-tac-toe, the first time you play it, and so you get done really quick. So I wanted you guys to get enough practice with that before we begin. Does that make sense? Anybody have any questions before I
Is that in the chat to download it?
Yeah, it will be in a minute. I haven't done it yet. Okay. So I was just checking to see if anybody had any questions before I put it all out there and before I create groups. Let's see, how many do we have? We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. So there's 9 of you. So a little bit of a math problem. So there'll be one group of 3, I think. And so you guys can take turns or work together. Like I said, this isn't just for something for you to practice. All right, there's the different groups. Now let me get your breakout rooms open. And so there you go. Everything should be open for you to join now. Welcome back. We'll wait for everybody else to pop back in here. Who was the big winner? Or was there one?
Cindy.
Cindy.
I had very good dice rolls this time.
She's good at the dice.
I like that little Google roller. That was neat. I didn't even know they could do all the different poly shapes.
Brooke, we also, I merged all the cells and put the total in there to help us at the end with counting.
Look at you.
Instead of doing the equations, we didn't write the equations down, we just did the total. So I just put it in the boxes themselves.
Perfect.
that helped to add up in the end if we had any questions,
Good.
besides looking at the boxes and saying, oh, I Cynthia won. Yeah. Obviously.
All right, welcome back, everybody. So let's talk about this activity. Somebody want to talk about how did you decide to use your dice to make a rectangle? What were you thinking about?
Bigger numbers.
Bigger numbers?
Bigger
Okay.
spaces. But I got really bad numbers, so it didn't matter.
Did anybody else have a strategy?
We would have liked last dice. We kept getting those little areas with 1x2s that we couldn't use. Lower dice would have worked beautifully.
Yeah. So smaller numbers, yeah. So when you go ahead, Jeremy.
I was gonna say, I didn't read the instructions carefully enough, and I thought that this was a cooperative exercise where we were supposed to together try to fill up the board completely.
Yeah.
And so my strategy switched a little bit after you came in and explained that, and then I looked back at the instructions and there they were. But I thought we were supposed to fill the whole field somehow.
Likewise.
That's okay. That's okay. I always tell my students that as long as they're doing math, the rules can be all thrown out the window. That part doesn't bother me. Okay, well, let's.
Definitely very fun.
Good. How did your decisions change from the beginning of that when you first started the game to the end? Was there any changes in your strategy? Those of you that were competing as opposed to collaborate. Well, even those that collaborated. I mean, was there a strategy that you used?
Well, from a collaborative point of view, I kept thinking if we end up with a row of just one, then we're gonna run ourselves into a corner. Because the minimum that you could get is a 2.
Yeah, I was trying to figure out a way to fill in the empty spaces most efficiently.
Yeah. Good.
It did feel a little bit right because we too were collaborative, but it feels a little bit like prisoner's dilemma, where, right, are we going to compete and I'm going to try to limit your options, or can we collaborate and see if we can cover more of this and collectively win, quote unquote, win. And just for us, each iteration we did worse. We got the most in our initial. Anyway, I liked it. My suggestion or preference would have been to have grids that were marked like a chessboard or numbered, so I could count. I was just having a little trouble tracking, but that's for me. Like, okay, well, I need to advocate or use you know what I mean? Use the cursor as a ruler type of thing, straight edge. Yeah.
Yeah.
If I would have thought about it, I bet we could have made some of the columns a little thicker to kind of maybe every fifth column make it thicker or wider.
Yeah. Make it visually easier. So if you wanted to make the biggest rectangle you could, how would you use your dice? How would you combine your numbers? Was there a strategy to that?
No, because we don't always want the biggest triangle because it's the most total area. So you get that little strip up the side, it all adds in.
Yeah, but if you wanted to make a big one, what would be your like, let's say you had 2 of them that were a high number and 2 that were a small number. What strategy do you think is there a strategy to that, or did you have time to kind of reflect on a strategy?
I paired up the biggest and the smallest with the biggest and the smallest to make like I don't know.
Yeah, no, that's a good strategy. Depending on the number, it kind of depends on what, your objective is. And then same thing with the smallest. So did you have any challenges with this game? And if so, what were they and how did you handle them? I know-
Well, Luke just kept rolling really low numbers. And so there's a part of it too, that's chance, of course.
Yes. Yes, well, this activity, I'm going to post the link. So this activity is actually it's actually out of a book called Mindset Math, and it is written by Dr. Bowler. It is posted on the CUNY website in New York. We mentioned it, remember the first institute back in March, we talked about the Collect New York. And so this is they have the whole kind of write-up there. And I like this because of the fact that it does use area models to kind of get you to think about, well, like the activity yesterday about number sense, right? How do you combine numbers, and then you're also doing area as well, right? Geometry, a little bit of geometry in that. So it's fun, and we're getting a lot of bang for our buck with this activity. We like that. Abilities as well as reflecting on our lessons, like before we do the lesson, as we're doing the lesson, and after the lesson is done. And then I just had a question for you guys, like how do you plan to be mindful of yourself and your beliefs as you start to think about growth mindset with your students? And can you think of some strategies like when talking with students?
Brooke, not to belabor the point, but you had listed those, what, 11 metacognitive strategies previously?
Yes.
And I think it was the second item.
Uh-huh.
And you'd give an example about draw or show an equation for
Let me go back.
the y.
Uh-huh.
Is that it?
Which, let me see. So we had previewing.
The second one must
This
be,
one?
yeah, right. The reason, the why. And so to me, I was thinking more along the lines of, right, being in adult education, sort of that contextualized learning. How are we going to use this in day to day beyond measuring for carpet, and encouraging students to bring in their examples as they see everyday math, whether it was at the grocery store or in some piece of mail they got, or if they're reading the sports highlights and statistics, and just heightening their number sense, or that metacognitive thought on maths.
Every day. Yes. And you're going to like this, John, because this next couple activities will kind of bring what you just did with the area model. We're going to continue with that line of thought. So it does play out into a different, robust type of real life context. But I liked how you said, if you needed to buy carpet, because that's the first thing I think of too when I think about area. So anyone else? Plans that you have about incorporating anything?
I really liked, I lost internet yesterday shortly after class, but I was following the links that you've given us, and the one about the math art challenge. I was really enjoying, and they had just such a simple picture there, but just the beauty of patterns. There was taking different fractions and plotting them, but plotting them one above each other, and it made this kind of cool rainbow thing. And there's a real neat, when you teach the Pythagorean theorem and you draw it out, there's this really cool spiral you create. If you draw triangle after triangle, just making the previous hypotenuse the new base, it's just gorgeous. And I just kind of like, and I want to do more of that, and especially now that I'm here in prison, just any place we can bring in beauty and capitalize on students' interest and abilities in art.
Mhm.
I want to do that, and
Yeah.
to link it in with math. I think this is going to be fun.
So for John, I know that you left a little bit early. I posted the link to the Adult Numeracy Network. There's a whole, we had a whole kind of discussion and an unpacking of a project called Math and Art. And yeah, it's really kind of cool about how the art
Nice.
challenge. Yeah. So that's what
Well, and two, I'm sorry, I missed that. It sounds fascinating. And I'm just trying to think of, right, there's math and music, but I
Mhm.
would think, right, embroidery or
Quilting.
quilting or any of that handiwork, dream catching, weaving, any of that. So yeah, that's beautiful.
Yeah.
Good. I'd like to hear more about that in the future.
Yeah. Yeah. I'll bring that back around to, there is also on that page, there is a math and talking about the harmony of music as well. So that's kind of a cool little thing if you haven't seen that either. So we're always looking for that context in the Adult Numeracy Network. And so before you all leave today, I'm going to show you where there's some free, if you like getting together with a bunch of math nerdy people and talking math, I know a group that you can get together with for free. And we talk about, they just earlier this week, they talked about the cicadas. So that would have been a cool one to go to talk about the bugs that are coming up out of the ground. Yeah, so I think that when we think about like plans to be mindful, like, those connections, that metacognition piece is important. Also, when we think about ourselves, this is called Gibbs reflective cyclic model for reflection. It's probably the most famous learning cycle when we think about, like, what happened, what were what were you thinking or your feelings as this happened? Was it a good or bad experience? What sense did you make? What conclusions? Like, you could also do this with your students, because recall that growth mindset is more than just having that positive attitude and being open-minded. It's about self-reflection. It's about making advances or achieving things. And so I think that these are things that our students don't get a lot of time for, or a lot of space for. So it's great if we can include those. I also remind ourselves to just check for self-biases and perceptions about just different things. Sometimes we assume students should know things, or we forget how difficult it was for us to learn a particular task, or maybe something wasn't difficult for us, so we struggle with trying to. So just, be mindful of those types of things as well. And then just practice techniques that are new. I'm going to encourage everybody to just continue to do that. I know this is our last institute, but I want to push you guys to continue to try new things and to maybe set a goal for yourself. Like, you don't have to change everything that you're doing, but maybe you make a goal that you're going to do one thing differently in the next 10 weeks or something like that. And you just try that one thing, and that's okay. Sometimes change takes time, just like learning takes time. And what works for one class may not necessarily work for another group of students. But it's just about, and sometimes when you tweak everything, you can't figure out what actually was good because you don't know what was that one thing that seemed to make the difference. So I'm just going to encourage you to try new things, set a goal for yourself, and then work on learning, continuing to learn. Okay, so I have another short video.
Another interesting new finding
volume
from brain
okay?
science that's super important for math learning is that brain crossing, going across brain pathways, makes us learn math most powerfully. So what is brain crossing? We know that some brain pathways light up when we think about symbols such as numbers. Other brain pathways light up when we visualize, draw, or estimate with numbers. And visualizing and drawing and estimating are all really important to math. But new research tells us that when we're doing both together, when we're both thinking about numbers as symbols and we're visualizing and drawing the numbers, we're using pathways that connect across the brain. And that brain crossing, drawing and visualizing and using symbols together in math, is the most powerful math learning. You can see some examples here of brain crossing examples when we think visually about numbers and about fractions and algebra. We'll be getting you to do this brain crossing in this week of inspirational math. So you'll be doing lots of math examples that ask you to draw and see math and numbers, which will be important to your learning.
All right, we're going to be doing more
Another-
brain crossing stuff. So she talked about visualizing numbers, and we did some of that when we were doing the field, you know, when you were coming up with your areas for the field. So definitely we are scaffolding our instruction, in which like covering the field was the foundation for what we're doing. But we are going to be doing, because I know that you guys are an advanced group of learners, I'm going to skip over a whole bunch of stuff and we're going to just dive right on into fractions because I know that you guys can handle it. Normally, I wouldn't do this with a group of students because we all know that our students struggle visually with fractions in general, but I know that you guys will be okay. So the questions that I often get from students is whenever we add or subtract fractions, why must we have that same denominator? Why does that happen? And when we multiply or divide, why don't we have to have? Like, it's so confusing to students. So we're going to focus on multiplication, and we're going to do it through a visual model. So I'm going to go through this slowly. Has anyone ever seen this done? It's just so that way I know. Okay, sort of. Okay. It is challenging because I know you all know the answer. I know your brains right now are saying that's 2/6. I know that's 1/3. We're done. But remember, we're going to take this as a visual because some students really struggle with being able to make that connection. And we were talking about that cross brain activity. Okay, so if we start by drawing 2/3 of something and 1/2 of something, then what we can do is there's my 2 out of 3 and there's my 1 out of 2. All right. Now we're going to transfer the marks and the portions of one fraction onto the other fraction like that. So all I did was go from the 2/3 and the 1/2, and then I just moved the 1/2 over. Now, the denominator of the product is the total number of pieces that we have in our diagram. So how many total we have there? The total pieces. We have 6. Right. Yep. 6 pieces.
Yeah.
Yep. Okay. So there they are. Now, that's the bottom. The top number is the number of pieces that are shaded what we call twice. So in this, for this particular, this would be the green and the cross lines. So how many have green and cross lines? 2. Yeah. And so there's our 2/6. And then of course, to finish the problem, we would reduce it down.
That's just an example of, I think, technology's ability to give that visual, how impactful.
Yeah. So and so your guys are going to have an activity here in a few minutes where your guys are going to be doing this. So would you like me to show it to you one more time?
I'm familiar with it.
I see Karen say yes. That's okay. We can do it one more time because it is new. I mean, as someone, and I tell my students this, as someone that is classically trained, that's me, who knows all these algorithms, sometimes it's hard for me to take a step back and visually see it, but I appreciate the challenge. So, all right. So you have your 2 pieces. One's divided into 2/3. One's divided in 1/2. You put one on top of the other. And then we're going to number all the pieces. That's the denominator. The part where it's double shaded, that is your numerator.
I'm not seeing how you could do that with paper.
Oh,
Easily if you, make your
Like
halves
transparent,
and your
transparent
thirds.
sheet.
And
you
then
just draw it.
color
You
one
just,
with yellow and one with red, and where it's orange, there's your numerator.
We
Yeah,
don't
you-
have anything with color.
yeah, but you have pencils and pens, right?
Shade one this way, shade one that way, make hatch marks in different directions, and where the
Yeah.
hatch
Shading would
marks
work.
are.
Yeah, with
Yeah.
shading.
Yeah, you could do shading.
Yeah, we have this whole thing with the Department of Corrections that they're pulling all of our color printers. We can't do anything except black and white.
Oh, I
Yeah.
was just talking about colored pencils.
We don't have colored pencils.
We do.
I'm going to show you also, I'm going to model division, although we're not going to practice the division because division's a little more difficult of a skill, but I still feel like it's a valuable one for you to see. And then you'll get, a copy of all the PowerPoints and everything up on the website. So if you want, you can pull this down and look at it. So once again, we're going to start with our 1/4 and then our 2/3. So there's my 1/4, 1 out of 4, and my 2 out of 3. And then we transfer the markings again. So here we're looking at the number of originally shaded tiles that we started with. That is the new numerator. So there we go. That'd be 3. And then the denominator is the number of shaded by the divisor. That's your new denominator. So 8. So we combined everything together. We get 3/8. All right. So once again, I'm going to put you into your groups. I'm going to give you a link in the chat. Let me get my screen here to where I can put my little boxes.
That went pretty fast, Brooke, but to me, I'm just kind of caught up on the first one. We looked at what was remaining, where that second one,
Right.
there was some overlap there.
Right. So remember, division is related to subtraction. So there's a little bit more to it. We did go through that really fast. Like I said, we're going to practice the multiplication first and kind of get that one under our belt. To practice the division, like I'm happy to do that offline with people, because it does take practice. And I still will go through a lot of paper sometimes, trying to do the visual for division.
Can
Okay.
I make a comment real quick? I'm sorry.
Yeah, go for it, Jeff.
But I was thinking about if you only had black and white to work with. You could do like a forward slash hashing one way and a backslash the other way, and you'd still see the overlap.
Yep.
in
Yeah,
that.
because it'd be the X's. Yep.
Yep.
Okay, so here, you're going to be working on making area models. Now, I did make the comment that you could do this just on your own paper. You don't always have to like try to draw the boxes, but I know some people feel very comfortable with the technology, so they can do that in the Word doc or in the Google Doc. But basically there are 4 problems. I just want you to choose 2 to just practice this relationship, but so you can see the difference between you can see that traditional algorithm, where did that come from? And this is just for multiplication. And I'll give you 15 minutes to kind of do this little activity. Okay. And I think that the rooms are open, so I will let you go at it.
I maybe
Oh, you maybe got it?
maybe got it. I gotta
Awesome.
go through it again though and make sure I'm
Cool.
in the right spot.
Welcome back, everybody.
That was fun.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was fun unless you pick the 5/3 divided by 1/4.
That's where we were at.
I
Yeah.
was stuck. Yeah, that was blowing my mind.
That's the one that we've been I got stuck in with Nakia and John, and we've been working on that one. Did anybody get that one figured out? Oh, Robin.
Oh, Robin. Okay,
Robin did.
hang on.
Explain to us, Robin.
Nice, 5.
There's your 5. I see it. And
With the
then
12s, 3.
12's 1.
It looks like you got
Oh,
18.
because it's only of the fourth. Okay.
Which group was this so I can see it?
This is, what group are you in, Robin? One? Did you
One.
draw it in one?
We didn't, yeah, we didn't do any notes. So, but
She held it
we were-
up. Can you see it, Jeremy?
Oh, okay, let me, oh, interesting.
Yeah, you have
Oh.
to make one set of lines vertical and the other set horizontal in order for these to work, and then it works every time.
right, but what we were stuck on was the 12.
Mm-hmm.
So,
I don't understand what you can be stuck on. What's,
well, let me explain. So, okay, so here we have we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5
Yep.
that have both. But then the 12, we're understanding the 12 comes because there's 12 there from the 3x4.
Because the third is divided up into 12.
Right,
Yeah.
so then
into
there's
quarters.
12 here, but there's 12 here, but that's just the denominator because that's how many of the 12, regardless of which fraction piece they're in,
Mhm.
right? Does that make sense what I'm saying?
Yes.
Boy, that helps me a lot more than, yeah, huh,
Yeah.
huh.
Okay,
What
Yeah.
was the equation you guys worked on?
The one that's more than one, 5/3.
5/3 times 1/4.
Yeah. That one, not any fraction that is great, that's an improper, is a harder visual to draw. I should have tweaked the problems a bit.
But that makes sense that you're one and then part of another one.
Yes.
So you have to count that 5 across the top, but only the one. Yeah. Huh.
And that's where we were,
Huh.
that was where our discussion was when the break room ended. And that's why, Ruth, that's why I said that we were confused because we hadn't finished our discussion.
Oh,
So-
sorry.
No,
Sorry.
that's okay. We were very thorough with our problem and working it through. So,
You guys
and
are
color
awesome.
coding definitely helped. I don't know if you can see, but I used green and blue.
Yes.
So it did make a difference. So,
Can I ask a question about this? Is there I was thinking how nice it would be because I teach online and it would be nice if there were an online tool that kind of does this as opposed to having to draw a table every time. Is there such a thing that exists that like automatically does this? Because if not, I feel like it's something that someone who knows programming could code a tool like this for people to teach math.
Yeah.
Jeremy, I
AI.
love it. And I know a lot of you probably use all sorts of different tools from, your document cams to spreadsheets to graphic organizers. But to me, it's like, could there be the adult numeracy network comes together, hires Brooke and a team of specialists to develop, a math nonprofit ancillary like North Star has for digital literacy, to have some sort of suite of online tools and then sell licenses at a nonprofit rate. That'd be
So-
awesome.
That's awesome.
Polypad, a lot of us use Polypad as a online drawing thing. But as far as having something out there that just automatically visually does, I have not come across it, but I am more than happy to reach out to my friends that also teach like in the Adult Numeracy Network to see if there is something they suggest. Because even in our play group that we have, we don't have anything for really for fractions and things, and maybe we should because we have like fractions and factors and squares, and we do a lot of stuff with, but a lot of people have been coding like over when COVID happened. A lot of my adult numeracy friends with the Adult Numeracy Network, they did take up some coding classes. That's why some of those play games, those are codes that they wrote. One of them, the Guess My Rule, that's on that virtual play that I sent yesterday. That one is because it's coded, but that's a good one. We're always looking for things to do, so I'm gonna write it down, make a note right here about the visual fractions, Jeremy, and I'll let you know. Okay.
Thank you. Because I know there's some, super basic ones out there, like with pie charts and things like that, but I've never seen something that does this type of thing, and that would be really nice.
Yeah, because it is a good visual for us. And it does, like, the whole point of me having you guys do this was kind of putting it all together. This covering the fields and area models as a way to like introduce algebraic multiplication like through a visual. And so I drew this. I did a little drawing. So this is kind of taking both of those ideas, where if I have two binomials and I do an area model of each one, and then I come up with the trinomial, because I know a lot of times our students struggle with, my favorite is when students go, I foil. I'm like, foil, like tin foil, because that's the algorithm that they've memorized, as opposed to seeing it as, okay, these are square, like this is an x squared by x, so that's an x squared. And this would be a 3 by an x, so this would be 3x. And this is an x by 2, so this little area here is a 2x, and then a 2 times 3, well, that's a 6. And then, of course, I circled these here to show that we would combine those like terms to get 5. Okay, so I am going to let you practice that one, that type of an activity, because that's a lot of students really love that activity when it comes to learning how to multiply binomials. So I'm going to post that in the chat. I'm going to put you back in your groups, and we're just going to and you can use you can use paper for this too, unless you want to be technology, like into the technology. And I'm only going to give us like maybe 10 minutes for this, so we can have enough time to kind of finish everything out. So rooms are open, links are in chat. Go play. Moments while you were doing that. Anybody struggle with multiplication of binomials? I know Ruth and I were talking about, they didn't show us that when we were in school. I would have liked it.
Yeah.
Because I think it's better than like remembering. It took me forever when I was first learning how to do first, outer, inner, or whatever. Like I struggled with that.
Yeah, and I was trying to get into my IXL account so I could cut and paste some screenshots, but apparently my password's been changed. I could log into my administrative account, but not my teacher account. And from the administrative account, I don't think I can get into the actual lessons. And my teacher account, yeah, the password's been changed apparently. So yesterday my email disappeared. So
interesting.
Never, yeah. But IXL does have some, they do a nice job of showing visuals for things,
So
and they'll do it with colors where the negatives are in red, so you can tell at a glance if it's green or if it's red, or
yeah,
Yeah.
we're gonna show you a different here in a minute, a different website that's that I have used before in the past. Anyway, so know that this skill just builds upon everything that we've been doing today, with the drawing of the area model of the fractions. Like, we're constantly, if you wanted to, you could just use a piece of graph paper. You're just building on this idea of spatial awareness. You're creating a visual for content. And I will tell you that, I mean, I live in rural Kansas, so a lot of my farmers sometimes will tell me that this reminds them of how they section their crops up. So, and I appreciated that example, because You know, sometimes we struggle to where would you see this in the world type of a thing. And, or, you know, they told me that sometimes with fencing, you know, you got to figure out spaces and how things are for the entire area. And so there is some context to it. Sometimes you just got to dig for it. So one of the things that I like to do is build on this idea of area models. And I did this one just by hand. So this is this idea if, so polypad, and I'll put this in the chat so that way you guys don't have to Google everything, is a great place to go that has all kinds of like manipulatives and algebra tiles. And so if you, you know, sometimes you build the inside, and Bergman, you were asking about if I were to build the inside of a particular, so there's my x squared, and then you know, I would have so many y's, which I'm gonna rotate that one this direction. And actually it shouldn't be a positive, that's a positive. I'll take a negative. Yeah, because it's minus 2 negatives. Make a positive. And then you have your little 6 little positive little dudes here. 1, 2. So you're drawing your little pieces. That's a 4. 5, 6. There's 5. And 6. And then this is a minus going this direction. In this direction. I actually built this backwards, so not that one. Delete. But you can build as complex polynomials as you possibly want. So if I were to start with x squared minus 5x's plus 6, that's this. X squared, 5. Oh, those are y's. Sorry. Assume those are x's. Everybody imagine. Those are, that way I don't have to drag all the x's over there. But there are my 5 x's. And then there are my 6 positive 1s. And then when we talk about factoring it, you talk about, okay, well, that's the distance of an x. So that means all of these would be x. And then these would be my negatives. So they're 2 this direction. And then here's this. And so you end up with an area model for factoring in which you figure out this is x minus 2 and x plus 3. But if you don't have these fancy technology things like this, I mean, you can just draw squares. And the way I do this with when I don't have my fancy technology is I start with my equation and then I list my factors of 6 to think about, well, how am I going to get to 5? And then I break them into the 2 pieces here. And then there's the 6. So once I have my insides, then I can figure out my outsides. Like I know this side has to be an x by x. So if this is an x this direction, this one has to be the -2. And if this is the x, come down here, that has to be the -3. And then -3 times -2 is +6. So it's just another model for playing around and you know, something to play with. And if you have questions of that, I'm going to encourage you to reach out to me. I'm happy to work with you guys offline because.
Oh, sorry. Also to note on that 6, you would also have to have -1 and -6 as your factors, and -2 and -3 as your factors.
Negative, I'm sorry. Oh, wrong way. On this one or on my polypad?
So over here on the right where you have your factors of 6.
Yeah.
I would also include -1, -6.
Oh, okay. You would do the positive net. Yes. Okay. Yeah.
Because that will help in the middle. I'm sorry, I'm moving my mouse like you can see it. That would help with figuring out the -5.
Yes.
If
Okay.
you don't draw the box.
Yeah. I hear what you're saying. See, normally things like that, when I do things ahead like that and students say, well, where did that come from? Then I'm like, oh yeah, I forget. So thank you for that, Robin. Okay, so we are winding down. So just my overall final thoughts about some things. So remember, believing one's ability may change over time. That's an important one to help our students, as well as ourselves, know that we can change old habits. Always start with something that's real and familiar, and to remember to try one new thing. And with that, I'm going to encourage you to, if you want to try one new thing for like just in your free time, if you go to the adult, I don't know why my keyboard's not working. Come on, keyboard. Adult. Okay. My keyboard has decided to die today. The adult numeracy network, where the polypad, I know I threw it in here. Maybe we can get there back way. There it is. We'll do it this way. My mouse seems to work, but my keyboard doesn't. Okay, so if you go to the adult numeracy network on the homepage at the bottom, every month we post things that are free for you to go to. So feel free to look through, and there's just months and months and months of stuff that we have. Right now it says the intro to computation is there, but and then of course I mentioned the play page. Definitely get on the play page, play around with the play page. And then, as Ruth mentioned, the art, math and art. There's also math and public spaces. And then, but the Adult Numeracy Network has a lot of free things that are available to you. And then, of course, I would be remiss if I didn't tell you guys that I am on the board. Look, there I am right there. So feel free to be, if you would like to become a member or want to join. We do send out a newsletter 3 times a year that just are stories of things that are out there. But most of the stuff, we just want to get the information out there to you guys for free. So please come join. We're all great, very supportive, very safe, inclusive environment. We're not gonna, no one's in there gonna be like, ha ha ha, you can't do math. Like, no, because that we're at all levels, and they would be a great resource to ask some of the questions as well. So
Certainly
anyway.
use your local grant money to support that or to pay for that membership. That's an allowable cost. Dr. Estes, Brooke, thank you so much. Congratulations, and thank you for this iteration of adult numeracy instruction. And I'd like to thank all of our teachers and administrators, our professionals in the field, for not only participating, but sharing in the large groups and in the breakout sessions, and being vulnerable and opening your minds and hearts to our colleagues and our students. So thank you. Have a lovely summer.
Yes, and I posted my email in there. So if you want to save any of the chat, if you go to the top of the chat where the 3 dots are and click there, you can save the entire chat that has all the links, all these links in it and everything. And please reach out if you have questions about anything. Happy to discuss anything with math. Have a great summer. Thanks, John, for having me. I love coming to South Dakota.
Yeah, we're so
Great.
happy to have you. Take care, everyone.
Yep, take
Cheers.
care. Bye,
I really
guys.
enjoyed this. Thank you.